All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. I'm back with another New Jersey-centric video. I've done a lot of these lately, but I could not do it without welcoming one of my favorite people from my home state of New Jersey. It's my honor to welcome Diane Kamikaze. Diane, great to see you.
Great to see you too, Joel. How are you?
I am doing well. How are things with you?
Very well. Very well. Keeping,
Excellent.
yeah.
You're coming to me from the town of Springfield today, I see, judging
It
from
looks like it, yes, actually. And I had mentioned before, this is an old COVID background that seems to be stuck to my Zoom ID, and here we are. It's better than having to blur all the mess I have in the background anyway. So
Well, it's just wonderful to connect with you. It's been way too long. As it happens today, and I bring this up because today is Bill Ward's 76th birthday, and the last time you and I were together was 6 years ago because we did a 70th birthday show for Bill
I
on your show on WFMU. You were gracious enough to give me the afternoon, and we played some Bill related songs and had some special guests record some greetings for Bill.
yeah, that was
Um,
great.
yeah, that was a really great afternoon. So it's been since then that we've been, we haven't had a face-to-face since then. So this is really nice.
Yeah,
And we have much to talk about. You have a tremendous history in a variety of arenas, specifically in New Jersey. So I figure we'll kind of segment it out and take things as they come.
sure.
Um, but I wanted to kind of start because I know you're a passionate music fan. You always have been. When did music first become your world, so to speak, when you really found your love for music?
Um, hmm. Well, I have a music moment in my head. Um, and I'm not sure. Well, so it was when I was really pretty young. Um, we used to have a record player. We had a big console stereo downstairs that had like the TV and the record player and the radio all in, 8 feet of furniture. And then we had a portable record player that was still like a foot deep and had tubes and all this stuff. Um, and Batman was my favorite TV show, and it was my birthday, and my dad went downstairs and basically they got me the 45 to the Batman theme song, and they were playing it on a record, and I flipped my lid and ran downstairs like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, I have the Batman record. And I think my parents were probably not that happy about it afterwards, because I do believe I played it probably 300 times in a row, like after getting that. So that was a music moment. Um, and so music did make a difference. Maybe it was Batman more. I mean, it was a great series, back then. And then the other thing that I remember was when I was, you know, young enough, like 9 or 10, riding my bike all over the neighborhood, and there was a playground and a municipal pool nearby, and the hippies used to park there, and there were all these vans that had the shag carpeting and the mushroom shaped windows and all this stuff, and they would hang out, and I would just ride my bike around and I would ask them what they were listening to, and I remember having music conversations with them, and it got to the point where like they were asking me to go buy rolling papers for them because they weren't allowed up at the 7-Eleven. So I was earning a little bit of money. And I started my 45 collection then, because I would go and buy sodas and rolling papers for these people. And they were really cool to me. And it was a period of time where I didn't really have any friends. Like there was something, I still don't know what it was, but there was something about me as a child that didn't really make many friends. So I just did my own thing, and these people were really nice to me, um, which is also, I think, why I got into tattooing, because a lot of them were tattooed, and they were nice. They taught me about music. They were friendly. After a while, they referred to me as, "Oh, the cool kid is here again," and like, when you're 9 and everybody else in school is making fun of you, it's like I got these people that are double my age calling me the cool kid. I'm coming back.
Mhm.
So, but I would, I remember them saying like, I remember going out and buying like Steppenwolf 45s and stuff like that, and like, oh, I bought that record, and then they're like, you did? Like, yeah, I have a record player, and then they would just turn me on to music. So it mattered at a pretty young age. Plus, my dad was a drummer. Um, and so there was always music going in my household. Like that was one of those things. Like we did have 2 record players, which might have been unusual for households. I'm not really sure.
Now, you picked up drums yourself,
I,
eventually.
well, that was a total punk rock thing, though. Like we were, um, I was a DJ at Ramapo College. I never went to Ramapo College, but I was recruited to be a DJ, for lack of a better term. Um, and we just decided to make a band. And I said, well, I've got drums at home. Like I was not a drummer. There were drums. So it was the total like punk rock, like, what can we do? I have access to this, I'll do that. And I was terrible for a really long time. It's kind of funny. But yeah, so I picked it up. My dad was certainly proud. My brother was in a cover band at the time. Like my household was pretty rumbly during like the 80s. I remember one time a very proud moment for my father when the people next door were moving and the realtor came over and asked us not to drum. Like, we're going to be showing the house today. Is there any way you could not drum? We hear you all the time. So, yeah.
So the band you formed at that time, that would have been Children in Adult Jails, correct?
Yes. Yes. And technically, I was their second drummer, although I think the first drummer lasted for a week. But yeah. So, Sue and Lori and Chris all went to Ramapo. I know that Sue and Lori were definitely on the radio station, which is how I met them. They might have brought in Chris. I'm not sure if he was a DJ, but that's how we met, and we did some gigs at Ramapo and mostly rehearsed up in like the Mawa area and that kind of
And what year would this have been when you guys formed?
thing. I would guess 83, maybe. Maybe 82. So I'm not great with dates, but I know like it had to have been 82 or 83. I know our EP came out in 85. We were on a compilation cassette in 84. So somewhere before that, and I don't know, mid 80s. A good
And,
period of time.
and that, looking back on it now, that era is pretty iconic if you're from Jersey. In my case, I was really, really young back then, so I kind of missed it. But I know a lot of people today refer back to that era very fondly. And as you know, I've had Jack Steeples on the show, Paul Richard, Lenny Splendorio, Tommy Kaprowski, some Steve Zing, like a lot of the people who were around in those days. And I know Children in Adult Jails did become part of the Buy Our Records roster
Yes.
bands. And, I talked at length about Buy Our Records with Lenny. But, what are your thoughts on that label as far as looking back now, the kind of impact Buy Our Records had in the 80s as far as getting so many of these bands out there on vinyl and getting the distribution that they ended up having?
Well, they were a very important label. They were great to us in terms of, we want to put out your record. And so our response was, okay, that sounds cool. And it New Jersey itself had a lot of stuff going on. There were a lot of gigs. There were a lot of like one-off shows. There were a lot of people promoting. A lot of bigger bands came through New Jersey. We were lucky enough to open for the Butthole Surfers, the Dead Kennedys, Black Flag. Like, you know, there was a lot of stuff going on, and Bio Records was the New Jersey label. I mean, I shouldn't. I mean, there was Mother Records, but they were more down the shore.
Mhm.
But Bio Records was definitely interested in listening to what was new and finding like turning over stones and really looking for the gold, like looking for what was cool, and then keeping up with AOD and Bedlam and their their real foundational bands. But a very important label, and I don't know what the distribution was like. And the joke is that the Children of Jails record lost more than it sold. Um, like just for the record, that's what it was kind of viewed as um, uh, in terms of returns. But I don't know the scope of distribution, but I do know. So for a period of time, I was a typesetter by trade. That's what I did before I started tattooing. And I started typesetting all the ads for Bio Records, their Maxim Rock and Roll ads and Flipside ads and all of that. So I know they were advertising, nationally, internationally. Lenny had a column in Maxim Rock and Roll. So yeah, they were sort of the center of this New Jersey world. And there was, of course, a lot going on in New York, and New Jersey had its own scene to speak of.
Well, I know from what I know about the mid-80s, this would have been the era of like the show place in Dover,
Yes,
which I believe is where you played with Black Flag, if
yes,
I'm correct.
yes. Wait,
Um,
I can show you. Look, I brought this for you, Joel. Can you see that? Let's see.
Filter's drowning it out a little bit, but I can see Gone. I can see you guys. Is that Painted Willie there on the flyer?
Yes, it's
Uh,
Black Flag, Painted Willie, and Gone, and us.
So that would have been, I see more Simpsons Couch than Flyer. I have the same
Yeah,
problem with my
sorry.
filters, but there you go. So this would have been, if I'm looking at the length of Greg Ginn's hair, this would have been like 86, probably.
Probably. Yeah,
Yeah. Wow. Show place in Dover.
yeah, yeah. It's pretty cool.
So you had, yeah, the show place, City Gardens, of course, was happening at that time.
Yes,
This was a little bit before the pipeline. I think it may have just started as DJ Freaks at that
yeah,
time,
yeah.
86.
I think so.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so it's weird because I grew up a few years later is when I started listening to music. I was up in Sussex County, and it blows my mind now to think 20 minutes from where I grew up, had I been 3 or 4 years older, I could have seen Black Flag with Henry. I could have seen all these different bands coming through. Um,
Showplace had a lot of great shows, and there was Creations in West Orange. There was Aldo's
Aldo's, yeah.
was having shows then, and then there was the sort of smaller stuff, the Modern Artists Hall in Rahway. There was a Union Rec Hall. Um, there was the Court Tavern. There was Patrick's. There was Maxwell's.
Hmm.
Um, and then there were just random, like I know that we played Ramapo at least once or twice, and we played Somerset County College once. um I mean, New Jersey was definitely all in terms of gigs. It was very active. There were a lot of zines and a lot of people who wanted to contribute to it, to the scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly a cornerstone of that era and many eras. I mean, even today, of course, would be WFMU. Um, and we're talking about one of the greatest freeform radio stations, probably the greatest freeform radio station on earth. And growing up in New Jersey, it was so critical for me, just as a music fan. When I discovered FMU, it was like the universe had opened up. I mean, there was just so much on that channel or that station, and still is to this day. And that's how you and I first met in the 90s because you were heavily involved in FMU. When did your history with the station begin?
Um, in I think 84, I started doing a show. It might have been 83, might have been 85, but it was that era because Lori was on FMU and she and we all met from being on the Ramapo station and she suggested that I look at auditioning over there and I did and I got a show. Um, and I've been there ever since. And I went from, you know, DJing, and then I learned to engineer there, and which was ended up being a bit of a side career for me for a long time. And now I am still on the air. I'm on the stream. I'm on the Rock and Soul Radio stream now. But yeah, I mean it is an East Coast icon. It's really a world, you know. The FMU reset the clock on what radio is
Yeah.
and what freedom over the airwaves is really. And especially now, there's a lot of stations that had sort of set their sights on FMU as like this North Star, like, oh, we do what FMU does. And most of them are gone now. And now, you know, we have several streams. So we're sort of bulking up because FMU is, you know, not profit. So we do need to raise money every year for our operating costs. And yeah, I mean, I love the organization. There's nothing that I really wouldn't do to do radio, you know. I mean, it's really important to me. And I've always felt that myself that I don't know if it's purpose, but I have an allegiance to giving airtime to underground bands, to you know, to bands that are putting in their time and who are good and maybe who don't get popular.
Mm.
And you know, and that's one of the reasons why I actually really started concentrating on metal at some point because I was very confused in the 90s when punk sort of blew up and was on like major radio. Like I remember being in my tattoo shop, tattooing somebody and hearing like The Offspring, and I know that I had K Rock on, and I remember just turning around and being like, "What's going on?" And I I'm glad that all those bands enjoyed superstardom and made tons of money. And you know, a lot of bands are who don't make it are super talented and have to have side jobs, and I love that. And I felt that they didn't need my help anymore. You know, that was the whole thing where I was kind of like, "Oh, I'm out. I don't. Why would I play these bands on my show?" And it's not like I didn't like them, but they didn't need my help. And I felt that metal was always underground. You
Mhm.
know, there was always some little offensive, angle to metal, which I have to say I delight in to this day. So that's what I might kind of be known for. But I mean, I certainly grew up in the world of hardcore for sure. You know,
When you started in '84, was it under the name Diane's Kamikaze Fun Machine?
I don't know. I I think I had the name fairly early, but I don't think I had the name right away. And I could be wrong, and I don't think there's any way to find out. Well,
Well, I
well,
know, like I said, I met you in the '90s because I'm trying to think of what band it was because I played Pat Duncan's show many, many times over
yeah,
the.
I met you as a drummer.
Yeah.
You were drumming for tell me some bands you're in. I can
Oh
tell you.
gosh. Well, I was thinking about this because it all kind of blurs after a while, you know. And first time I played Pat Duncan's show, I was 17 years old. It was my very first band. And let me just say, FMU, God bless FMU, God bless Pat Duncan, because here's a guy who let my high school band play live on the radio.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, that's priceless. You know, it's there's no way to express how meaningful that is now as a 46-year-old man to
right.
know that Pat Duncan did that, you know.
Yes.
I think when we played there way back when it was at the house, I guess that was in East Orange, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to say it was Charles from Rorschach was doing the sound that night. 'Cause he
Yes.
did that for a while. I think it was 96 or 97 when I was in Squiggy. You were running sound for Pat.
Mhm.
So that's how you and I first met. And then fast forward a few years, I put out my first book. You MySpaced me. And said, hi, my name is Diane. I do this show. I'd love to have you on. I'm like, I remember you from FMU. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know. And then you and I reconnect, and then you were very wonderful in having me on your show a couple of times during that period. And that's when I started listening to your show more regularly. And I know you had this great segment called Peer Pressure, where you brought on different guests to play some records. So was your show always kind of primarily interview based, or did you have actual bands come in the way Pat would?
I didn't have that many live bands. I had a few, but not many. And the show really only became interview based in like 2010.
Okay.
Before that, for the most part, I was playing records for 3 hours. Which, oh, you
And
know what? The Brighton Bar. Brighton Bar, also a very important venue in New Jersey when we were going through that list.
oh
And
yeah,
that
absolutely.
was a that was a mainstay. That was, I mean, it's not there anymore, but that was one of the longer running venues. Just have to shout out to.
Absolutely. And shout out to Jack,
Yes.
the great Jack O'Monahan, you know, absolute legend. You know, there are some people who, because I'm a little younger than a lot of the people who came before, but my generation, when we were coming up, it was always, we were just looking at the people who came before us with such fondness. There's Jacko, there's Pat Duncan, there's you, the AOD guys, and it was like, wow, these are like our idols back then. And now, we see, Jack is still playing with Paul, um, the venues may have changed, but the characters are still kind of involved as much as they can be. And that's such a Jersey thing, I think. There are people who have been active since the early 80s, still doing what they do. Um, but going back to your show, I always really liked when you had guests on, because you're obviously a very passionate music fan. So when you'd have someone on, you really kind of got into the nooks and crannies of who that person was. And the fact you had them play records, you got to learn a lot more about your guests because they're playing their records that they wanted to share with the listener. Um, when you look back at that time period, who were some of the interviews and peer pressure guests that really still stand out in your mind?
So Blake Harrison from Pig Destroyer and Triac and Hatebeak, who actually recently just passed away, had the greatest playlist, and most of it I didn't know. So, and he's a really, really super fun guy. And Joe Preston
Mm,
had a lot of under the radar music. Like, there was definitely things that I learned from him. Um, and they were both sort of animated in this, like, well, hey Diane, like, kind of way, and it was just a like a jokey, fun thing, which is all I really ever wanted. I wanted to just chat with people about records. Um, and then the one interview that stands out for me is somebody else who passed, Mark Stewart from the pop group.
Mm.
Um,
I remember that one. Yeah.
and so that was a crazy interview. So my way of prepping, and I mean, I know their music. Like I saw the pop group in the 80s and that kind of thing. Like I know who he was. I wasn't just pulling this out like, oh, I think I'll interview him. Let me read up. Like, like some people I'm more prepared for than others. And every so often, like PR people get to FMU and like, oh, would you like to interview such and such? Would you like to interview such and such? And I've done those interviews and they're very different than people that I really, really have history with their music and want to know. And Mark Stewart had a reputation of being really tough to deal with. And so, I had really thought out a lot of questions and I had them in this folder and I get to FMU and it wasn't live. I was going to be calling England, I was going to edit it, and then I was going to air it, but I had already announced when it was going to be on. And I go into my tote bag 5 minutes before I'm calling England, and I have the wrong folder. And I do not have a single question. And I'm like calling England in 3 minutes with nothing on my mind. But I knew their stuff, and I knew who I thought he was in music. And I just hung on his every word, and he went really into UFOs and all that kind of stuff, and all I could do was tell me more. What about that? Because I didn't have any questions, so it just went that way, and it was really wild. And he just went and went and went. It was one of the like scariest, most delightful conversations I've ever had in my life. Like what a soul. Like I know that he passed away a number of years ago, but like that energy is just still so palpable. Like that guy really made such an impact in music.
What I remember about that interview was he went off talking about Jim Dandy in Black Oak, Arkansas, right? Wasn't that part of the conversation?
Oh,
If I recall correctly, there was this whole bit where the conversation went into the topic of Black Oak, Arkansas, and he was talking about seeing Jim Dandy. And I think I've got this right. Forgive me if I don't, but I think it was the Mark Stewart interview because I remember thinking, here's somebody from the pop group, this very sort of esoteric, cerebral, very British kind of band. And here he is talking about Black Oak, Arkansas, and it's only the kind of conversation you get on WFMU. You get people who just talked about music, and sometimes the influences were very different than what you may suspect listening to that person's output. Um, I do know you're a big Stranglers fan. I know you had Hugh on the show.
I had Hugh on the show several times.
Mm.
And I actually just saw them at Royal Albert Hall last month.
Oh, cool.
Actually in March for their 50th anniversary. And that was just a moment that I had to go to. Yeah. And like, if you had told me while the Stranglers were really at what I consider their peak, like black and white, like, like late 70s, early 80s, that I would have Hugh Cornwell on my show, like that he would know my name or be able to pick me out and go like, hey, Diane, I would have told you like, oh my God, you're crazy. Like I'm really just a huge Stranglers fan. And I pushed for that interview. It was sort of softball to me, like, oh hey, Hugh's got a show at the Mercury Lounge coming up, and we'd like to get him in for like, for like a quick 20 minutes, say hello. And I said, oh no, like I'm the person that should be interviewing him, and this is FMU.
Mhm.
And we don't fuck around with just like oh, let's sell you some more tickets kind of thing. And I told him what I wanted. And the thing is, so for me, it was my birthday. And I always feel like that's my lucky day. Like I don't necessarily celebrate it, but like if something's happening or it's around my birthday and I want it, I'm like, I'm going to get it because that's my day. And I was like, no, I want a full interview and I want him and his band. I want them to play live. And we went back and forth and they agreed. And um, it was, it went very well. And then I got a phone call after my show, while I was walking to the Mercury Lounge to the gig. I had just come up from the PATH train. I got a phone call from Hugh's manager who told me that that was the best interview that anybody had ever done with Hugh in his career. And I just started to cry. Like, I was like, oh my God, but that was the thing. I knew everything about and not everything about the Stranglers, but I'm qualified, way qualified to do that interview. And it was not just a puff piece. And yeah, he checked in. He was in the habit of coming over and doing, three, like playing with a three piece and doing gigs for a number of years. I think it might have been in a row, or skipping a year, but like probably in that like 2010, 2011, 2012, maybe up to 2015. I think he was on my show like 3 times. So, and now, yeah, like if I saw him on the street, it would be like, "Hi, Diane," and that still blows my mind. So,
Oh, yeah. I've had similar experiences with people I should have no right to know.
yeah.
And it's like, hey, how's it going? I mean, I know the stuff I've done, whether it be the books, the website, now this YouTube channel in progress. There are much bigger outlets out there, but it blows my mind. I get some people who I'm very fortunate to know, like, if I reach out to certain people, they'll go, oh yeah, I'll come do your thing. And then we'll do the interview. Then they'll say, what is this for again? What are you doing now? I'm like, oh, you didn't know this was for this? They're like, no, we just know you and you know your stuff. And, if you call or email, we should do it. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Like, cause I'm like you. I mean, we're just fans,
Yes. Yeah.
who just
And I
ended up doing this, for fun. Sometimes it kind of amazes me, like James Williamson from the Stooges, like people I've come across and I'm like, I should have no right to know these people.
right, right. Yeah, but it's just who you are. I mean, I've got a YouTube channel with a couple, well, at least over 100 interviews on it. But I just took the audio interviews that I did, and I did like a photo albumy thing, so you
Mhm.
can see something. Um, and none of them really have that many hits. There's like a couple that do, but it's just a labor of love. I mean, I'm working on a website now. I'm working on a new podcast series called Chapters in Tattoo History. I still am interviewing people. I'm only backlogged by 9 interviews right now that I have like in the editing process, but that's what I love to do. And for me, bringing out the best in people and finding out about them and letting others who are interested, have that resource is what's important. And I've already decided it's like I'll do, podcasting and interviews until I die. Like
Mhm.
I don't have to, be at a gig jumping up and down. I don't go in the pit anymore. I do go to shows and I just stand further and further back. But yeah, I mean, just everything that came out of radio for me has just always been positive, and it's always been, like you said, a fan experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like I mentioned earlier, you did engineer many, many shows for Pat Duncan,
Mhm.
Pat's Thursday night shows. And I played enough of his shows, they got kind of wild sometimes. Sometimes there'd be 4 bands in one night, or I did a show, it was that Quasi Parasites reunion with Ron Knoll.
Oh yeah,
I was drumming for that, and it was us and Indecision, like this total, like, which one of these is not like the other, which one of these doesn't belong. But it was such a fun time, and both bands got along really well, and it was just total FMU that it made sense to have a Ramonesy pop punk band with Indecision, and
yeah.
it just worked. So you obviously saw a lot of bands come through Pat's show. You engineered a lot of bands. What are some of the top ones for you that just kind of blew your mind that A, the band was there to begin with, and B, the performance was just so memorable for you?
So the number one band I would say is Kilara from Richmond,
Mm.
spelled Kilara, because nobody still knows about them. Although they're doing reunion shows I think a show in Richmond in September, which I'm hoping to go to.
Mm.
Kilara's Eric Larson, who's a drummer for Avail and ended up being an Alabama Thunder Pussy and like a whole host of other bands. And I love them so much. They're like a sludgy crust hardcore band that I put out their record. Like I was so impressed and thought they were so great that I was like, I've never done a record label, but you don't, because I was like, what do you have out? They're like, oh, we don't have anything out. Like they just, we're going up and down the coast and grabbing shows. And I was so compelled by their music that I put out a 7-inch by them. And I started Thunder Lizard Records, Thunder Lizard Recordings, which only had 3 releases, which I still think they were great anyway. I put out a Bongzilla 7-inch after that.
Mm.
But yeah, so Kilara is number 1 on that list because I just found something that nobody would have heard, and I was just like, oh my God, you guys are fucking great. Like, what do you mean? Like, people need to hear you. What are you talking about? What do you mean you have no records out? Like, and that was, I mean, that kind of thing happened a lot at Pat's show. And when you mentioned like the chaos and stuff, quite often, I mean, Pat just had a calendar and he'd be like, yeah, we got 3 bands coming in today. And he would get in touch with me, be like, oh, we have 5 bands coming in tonight. So we would maybe have 3 play live in the 3 hours, and sometimes we could fit 4 in because sets weren't necessarily that long, especially if it was hardcore bands, and then record a band after the show, because the studio, we used a different studio to do the live performances than the regular on air. So the DJ after us was broadcasting from upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, sometimes we would just go. And who was it? I can't remember who it was. It might have been. No, I can't remember. Somebody got their vehicle broken into in East Orange, but they went out to the car to get something, and there was somebody in their van, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And the guy said, "I'm fixing your radio," and he took it and he left. And like, I wish I could remember the band, but there were so many bands from all over that it's a swimming pool in my head, with like a million names. But the East Orange, well, so and Damned played, DANAD. They were really great. They had to hang around in East Orange. They got there very, very early, so they saw a bit of the chaos that was East Orange. And they were a massively heavy band who a lot of them went to be in Kailesa.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had times when the Misfits would come down. I mean, Jerry would come down for fundraising and just talk to me and Pat on the air. And of course they did play. They played a set that I got to record. So talk about like not deserving to be there or whatever. Like Marky Ramone and Robo were drumming. Mm-hmm. So they were like switching off. And you just looked and Marky's like, nah, I don't need anything. Just mic up the drums. I'm fine, whatever. And he just starts that beat. And I'm just like, that's that. That, like, and he just has it down like so easily. And Dez was with the Misfits at the time. So I'm engineering for Dez and for Robo and for Marky Ramone and, and the Misfits all together. They did some Black Flag songs. They did some Ramone songs. They did some Misfit songs. And I remember, I don't know what song it was, but Dez was singing something. And he was facing me through the glass and he cursed and he said, sorry, like right to me. I remember just cracking up, me like, oh my God, like, what is happening? These are three bands of my history, like Misfits, Black Flag, and the Ramones, here now playing, and like, wow, you know, just I was fairly astounded, but had to be in the moment, like had to be in the moment at that moment because it was time to do some engineering. There was a set that the Weirdos played, and that actually came out. Frontier Records put that out. I think it was called Live on Radio, and that I'm very proud of. There's a number of things that do have my name on them. They're usually like an extra track here and there. I'm trying to think who else. There were, and I did engineer at FMU for a lot of the other DJs also. Engineered the Buzzcocks, the Dams, like for Terry and for Joe Belock, had Dennis Tech on, like some really, over the years, I've been very lucky to work with those bands. And then I started working at Maxwell's and I worked at the Court Tavern. So I did sound there, and that was a whole nother thing. But yeah, I absolutely loved engineering. And I took it to a level, to like the level that I was starting to fail at. And it was starting to become too tough and too technical. And I love live mixing. Like, absolutely.
You did mixing for Negative Approach for a while, if I remember.
I went on the road with Easy Action.
Oh,
that's John and Harold's, other like rock band, and they're great. They're
totally great.
Yeah. And they had played my show, and it just kind of happened. It was a short stint. But I went on the road with them. I went on the road with a number of bands in a certain period of time. And they were great. They brought a cot with them for me, just so that like I could always like have a little bit, depending on where, if they didn't get a hotel or if they crashed somewhere, so like they were really, really great. And what a great fucking band. John Brannon, he has a voice for the ages. Like when I first had them on my show, I was sound checking them and I wasn't sound checking his voice because I know how his delivery is. He's just straight on, like he's not going to do a sound check and go check. Like that has nothing to do with what's actually going to be projecting. So I, wasn't sound checking him. And then he said something and I said, well, I don't want to blow out your voice. And he said, I don't know what it is, but my voice just keeps getting stronger. And I was like, okay, then, and that is obviously true. Like he is unstoppable. And yeah.
Look, we know there's a lot of like tough looking guys on stage, like the real hardcore toughies,
Yeah.
John, who doesn't come off like a tough guy, he's not Harley, you know what I mean? Like he doesn't have the look and all that.
But he looks insane though.
Well,
like he could be nuts.
You can just walk on stage and you go, "Oh my God, this guy is frightening." He's probably the only front man who's ever genuinely frightened me.
Yeah.
Because that's like coming from like some guttural dark place, like
Yes.
he's the scary guy. Like the guys who are all like, yo, whatever, that's barking. John comes up on stage and you're like, you don't want to be within 100 feet of the guy because it's just pure rage. But I know I've never met John, but I've met some of the other guys from Negative Approach. They're like the nicest people in the world, and
yeah. Well, they have an outlet. That's the thing about people. If you have an outlet to scream and yell and express yourself, you don't need to be a dick to people.
right.
You're like, I'm totally cool. Like, I'm great. I go up there and I'm just like, bah! And I remember seeing them at, I think it was like Santos Party House or something, like, later, and seeing Negative Approach. And John was being pulled into the crowd and people were jumping on him and stuff. And I said to him afterwards, I said, John, like, you're getting bruised and fucking beat up, and you're, 10 years older than most of these people, if not 20. And he just said, can't tell no one what to do. Like, he's so real, like so absolutely real. Um, and I remember seeing them. So in the Negative Approach heyday, I think it was them and the Meatmen and the Misfits at the Mud Club. If I can visualize a flyer, but I'm not really sure. But I remember, like, his head was shaved, and he just like you know paced the stage, and I was like, oh shit. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, their record was the scariest looking cover anyway to start with. But when like Detroit became real in on a New York stage, that was like, holy fuck. But yeah, he's like the sweetest guy. He really is. I love seeing John. It's been a long time.
Yeah, he's one of my all-time favorite frontmen. You feel it when you watch Negative Approach.
Oh yeah.
That's not, hey, we're going to do a hardcore show. That is, I'm screaming to you from the pits of my tortured soul.
Yeah.
The world is on fire. I'm adding to it. No, fuck you. I mean, that's negative. I mean, perfectly named band.
Yeah.
But I remember this goes back maybe about 3 years ago. I was down in Virginia. I was visiting my father, and I was talking to my stepbrother's wife, and she's like, do you want to see what's around the neighborhood, see if there's any shows or anything? I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. So she's on her phone. She goes, this sounds like a show you'd like. There's a band called the Circle Jerks. Maybe you know about it. I'm like, yeah, I know the Circle Jerks. And Negative Approach. I'm like, I'm there. I'm there.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Get the Uber. I'm there. And they're incredible, of course. I think Municipal Waste was on the bill too.
Oh great. Yeah, they're local to Virginia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome bill. And then the guy who's playing drums for Negative Approach, I can't recall his name. I apologize, but he has a record store somewhere out there in the Midwest.
Oh.
So he brought like, crates of records on the road with him. So I'm flipping through, and there's the Electric Frankenstein, How to Make a Monster, the reissue. I wrote the liner notes for that record. So I said, do you mind if I take a picture of this? I want to, show the guys in Jersey that their record is down here at this show. He's like, yeah, sure. He's like, EF? I'm like, I used to actually play in Electric Frankenstein. He's like, no way. Like, oh my God. And then is Harold the guy who's like, he's shaved head, he plays with his back to the audience?
Yeah, a lot of times he does.
Yeah. He
Yeah.
came over, and he's like, and you see him on stage, and you're like, this guy's gonna tear your head off.
Yes.
He's like,
Yes.
hey man, I'm Harold. Good to meet you. And I'm like, you guys are awesome. We should hang out. So
Yeah, Harold's great. He was Gravatar also. Do you know Gravatar? I think they were Amphetamine Reptile. Uh, really, really noisy. Really like heavy. Like it. You would like them.
yeah, I mean, there's so many people who tend to leave it on the stage, like we were saying, like people who come to mind, Norman from Swans,
Yes.
like the most mellow guy ever. And then you watch him, and your skin falls off because it's so like visceral, and so look, I mean, this style of music, saved more lives than it ever harmed,
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know.
No argument from me there.
So I know you're still to this day involved with WFMU.
Mhm.
What can you tell me about your current show, what you're doing for the station now?
I'm on the Rock and Soul radio stream, so I don't go to Jersey City anymore to actually do a show. I do broadcast from home. That's like, all the tech that we learned in COVID. Um, and I like broadcasting from home. I do an hour. Um, I think it's fine for me right now where my life is at. I'm definitely concentrating more on doing like my podcast, and I don't do interviews anymore because it's a 1 hour show, but I kind of like just playing my music for an hour and connecting with people, and then concentrating on the podcast is under the FMU moniker. You can always just find it under, Diane WFMU if you search Apple, whatever. Um, and that's I've been back on the air now 2 years maybe. And it scratches an itch.
Mm.
I'm definitely not. I don't miss the days of lugging, record boxes and all that down to Jersey City just for those things. But I used to make a full day of it. I was on the air on Thursdays in the afternoon, and then I would stay until Pat came on at 11 p.m. So I would make a whole day of it. I'd be listening to new records and chilling out and go out for lunch and, just kind of have my big, like, 12 or 15-hour day at the station. So that doesn't happen anymore. And I find my own ways of finding new music, and I still really like being a presenter, and I love connecting with people. So I do a lot of interviews that are, when I used to do interviews like the peer pressure segments, that was all live. So the person would be there, you'd be there, whoever, I would have on would be there. We'd be playing records, we'd be talking. And then I would just edit it, and that would go up as a podcast also. But I basically edit the front and the back, and it's already been aired. So whatever we've said, we've said. Now I find that because I'm a really good and precise editor, that it takes me forever to edit things because these things haven't gone out yet. So I'm really listening for the rhythm of an interview and that kind of thing. And it definitely takes me much longer. It takes me, I've got a couple of jobs, so it's all spare time stuff where I'm putting things in and putting the work in to do the editing. So my turnaround time is not fast, and I don't really care. It's all passion stuff. People will find it if they want, and but that's what I do. That's what I'm really committed to doing, is to continue on the podcasting and interview thing. And I'm putting together a website that I am putting transcriptions on, and that kind of thing also. And I'd like that to be a little bit more fuller, but it's website stuff for me is I'm a little in the remedial stages, sort of like, I'm not AP website. So, but I'm doing what I can do. And so to answer your question, I'm on FMU on Wednesdays from 9 to 10 a.m. And you can go on the FMU website and search and click on Rock and Soul Radio. And that's the stream that I'm on. And all of the shows are archived and all that. So you can go to my playlists and listen to anything when you want to. And I also do another radio show called Rockers for Life on ZerodB Radio. And that's on Thursdays at 6 p.m. And that's definitely a focused metal show. My FMU show is more kind of like me waking up in the morning and see what I feel like. And it really runs the gamut. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but it's usually pretty all over the place. And I enjoy giving myself those options. And the ZerodB show, I put the archives up on Mixcloud that I have, and for years I was on Gimme Radio, and that was a very successful outlet for metal only. And I had what I think was a fairly popular show, and Gimme folded completely last April after 6 years of doing like weekly shows. And that was kind of a loss, I think, for the metal community. And so I was scrambling to do other stuff. And I had already been doing the ZerodB Radio show. And so that sort of became my metal focus show. But yeah, it's important to me to just get new music out there. Really is.
Well, it's wonderful. FMU weathered the worst of the pandemic, because there were certainly times when we were seeing things crumble, under the weight of what was happening economically. And even today, things are still shaky in a lot of ways for a lot of economic, areas. But
Yes.
FMU is still here. I got the fundraising package not too long ago, and I'm like, thank God
Still,
that that channel made it or a station made it.
yes, we still have great swag. There's a lot of people that volunteer. There's a lot of people that are really committed to the station, and we do have leadership that, I mean, Ken Friedman really, he has like a sixth sense as to what's going to happen in radio next or what we should do next. We were the very first station to broadcast online, the very first one. um, and I mean, he just saw it. I think because we had so many restrictions, because the FM band is full, and we needed to raise money. The college, Uppsala College, that it was housed in, for years, we got our we got a lot of not necessarily money from them, but we were in a campus building, and then we were in an off-campus building, and so our water bill was paid, our electricity bill was paid, and we had somewhere to be. And years ago, he started to notice that the payments that came to FMU would get delayed coming to us, and there was always a gap where some bill of ours wouldn't get paid, and he'd always have to call the office at the college, and they said, oh, that must be a mistake, okay. And it always was in summer, and he somehow figured out that they were taking our donation money and using it as a float until the tuition money started coming in. And so he created I guess a nonprofit called Friends of WFMU. And so when we had our next fundraiser, we siphoned some of that money off. And that's really when Uppsala started going downhill, because they
Mm.
weren't getting this loan from us. And at least that's how I understand it. And I have been with FMU for, through that entire time. And the college itself just wasn't a desirable place to go at a certain point. And so I think Ken has always known what to do next and what to look out for. And he could see, like, oh, this college is going to go under. They're using our money. We always got it back, but there was something that they were doing with the fact that they had, whatever, $100,000 coming in, and they would sort of use it for things and then sort of take care of us. And that's a random number. I don't know what it was really, but he has foresight. He really can see, and maybe it's just that he believes that we can create the future of radio and online, different streaming channels and all that. But he's always been very wise and made decisions that were necessary for FMU, and he's a big reason as to why FMU is still there for sure.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. It's like I said earlier, it's an important part of the culture, especially of New Jersey, but it's a huge part of the culture of just underground, not even so much underground, just music in general. Um, I I think the fact that FMU has always been so open to everything, it kind of puts the station ahead of the game as far as figuring out what's going to be important music. Because it was such a like I said, Pat would have my high school band play, but then you'd have Green Day come through the studio
Yes.
like, not too long after or around that time or so because you have the net so wide, FMU is able to catch whatever the next thing's going to be. Like I know there were times when Pat would have his fundraisers and he'd have t-shirts for a given year and there would be a list of bands on the back. And you look at some of these bands and you're like, some of the biggest bands in the world came through there.
Yeah.
But they came through there when they were sleeping on couches and sleeping in their vans, were playing, you know, the Brighton Bar or something, and now they're playing arenas, but because FMU had that welcoming spirit, like let's get as much as we can through here. It not only gave people their first exposure in a lot of ways, but it kind of set the bar
Yeah.
for other independent radio entities to kind of, you have to just celebrate it all, and because of that, FMU has been the staple.
Mhm.
I can tune in at any time of day and I know I'm going to get something out of it.
Yes.
I have my favorites. I always listen to you. I always listen to Pat, and Dave the Spaz, but I would tune in like randomly and like, what the hell is this? And that was the magic of FMU. You never quite knew what you were going to get, even on your show or even on Pat's show. Yeah, it was a certain style of music generally, but it could have been, as into metal as I am, you've mentioned bands in this conversation I've never heard of. But now I'm gonna go look them up because I know, Diane from FMU said it was cool, and that was always so important for growing up in Jersey to have that outlet,
Mhm.
you
Well,
know.
remember Pat's theme was Tangerine Dream.
Yep.
I mean, they're right there. That's a total boop. Like, okay, where are we going here? But yeah. I mean,
And Pat, I can't say enough about Pat Duncan. One thing I love about Pat is he was so himself, meaning that, he's playing, agnostic front and all these, and, you mentioned Pat's name with some bands, you know, big bands, they'll stand at attention, like Pat Duncan. He was the guy who played our demo and, and no one else would. But Pat's like the least punk rock guy ever.
oh yeah,
That's what
yeah,
makes him awesome. He's just like, but where would so many bands be without Pat Duncan? He would give everybody a shot.
exactly. And that's the thing, when you're out there doing, being in a band for the first time, or just kind of hoping that there's a scene out there. He created a scene. He gave you a chance. He gave you the enthusiasm to go to the next level, whatever that is, whether it's booking another show or like auditioning for a better band or whatnot. I mean, a lot of those bands are not big bands, but a lot of them did put out the FMU recordings.
Mm.
It's a lot of 7 inches by a lot of bands, that I've engineered and Charles has engineered, etc. And sometimes it's the band's only output, but it's you're creating historic documentation at that point. Like, there's people that are in their 50s and whatnot telling their kids, like, oh, yeah, I was in a band, I have a record out. And especially, well, obviously, the era that I come from is older, and we didn't know that we could put out our own records until we did. Um, and now the state of the music industry is all over the place. But I still don't know if people understand that you can just pretty much do anything as long as you find the way to do it. A lot of your stuff is self-published, right? So that's we lived in an era where we really made things, and that's the one thing about metal, which, I mean, I love metal and there's a lot of stuff floating around like streaming and that kind of thing, but punk was definitely more art oriented and for making things. Like, we were not afraid to actually make our stuff, to take that recording and press it on a 7 inch, or to take your words and put them in a book, or publish them in a fanzine. That era you know is very unique in a way.
Mhm.
And I think the genre too, and Pat really, really, cooked up a lot of schemes for people because of that, helped them, like, gave them fuel, gave them, here's your recording. Like, oh, wow, what do we do now? Well, you do what you want to. And this is the land of DIY.
Mhm.
And that's one thing that I really, really just took from the punk scene, and why I do podcasts and all types of ridiculous things, because I know that I can, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's amazing, especially the last few months, Pat on his Facebook's been posting all kinds of things from the archives.
Oh yeah,
I mentioned
session.
the, yeah, I mean, everything. And he's kept so much. I mentioned that first band I was in that I played on Pat's show, 95, 17 years old. About a month ago, we posted our demo. And
Uh-huh.
the vinyl sticker, our bass player still does. He works at a sign company,
Mm.
and we made like very cool vinyl stickers that probably still last to this day because they're really good stickers. And Pat had our demo and our stickers in a photo. And these are still my best friends in that band 30 years later. And I shared it with them. I said, look, Pat Duncan still has this stuff. So, when all these bands were coming up, and you don't know, I mean, it's tough being in a band sometimes, even if you're not career minded, if you're just a band doing shows, you're loading out in snowstorms, you're playing places that rip you off, or you're playing for crowds who might kick your butt or try to, all those things. It's like, is anybody listening? Is anybody getting the point? Pat got the point. Pat was listening. Pat still has your demo. I guarantee it. You know what I mean? And to have somebody like that when I was such a young kid was was massive. It was
Yeah.
massive.
It
Um,
creates safety. It creates safety to express yourself.
right.
Like, oh, that's cool. Like, there's no judgment, and you're on the radio. Like, it's a huge gift.
Absolutely. I wanted to get into your Facebook group, Rockers for Life,
Yes.
um, because that's grown into kind of a phenomenon. I've met people and become friends with people thanks to your group. So first of all, thank you for that. Um, for those who don't know what Rockers for Life is, kind of walk me through the creation of that and what the page, works to do and where things have gone since the beginning with that.
So, Rockers for Life is a Facebook group. Um, it is a daily music challenge. Like, every month, I put together a calendar, and it can be as easy as the challenge is like, uh, name a song that has a word that rhymes with May in the title, right? For May, or a song that was released in May, or something that's a little bit more obscure, like name a song that has like hisses or radio sounds in it, like and or something general. Name a metal song. Um, and it's a daily calendar. So I basically put together a calendar for the entire month. I publish it, and then there's posts that go up 3 times a day. And the way you participate is that you actually post a YouTube link so that people can listen to what your choice is. The whole idea, again, is to turn people on to music. And every so often, Facebook, like, I do keep away from things that might create a lot of you know uh, off color answers. And oh yeah, so April 1st. So I started January 1st, 2018, published this thing, and worked out the bugs for sure, because I didn't have a limit. I would let people just post. So it's like, oh, great, a song that, you know, rhymes with May, and people can come up. I mean, there's some answers that are really easy. And so I had to establish the one shot, one kill rule. Like, choose your song and post it. And that's it. And if you really, really, really have to post another one, put it in your comments below, because it's a very active website, and it's a very active Facebook group, and it scrolls. So you put in 9 things, you've wiped out a bunch of people's choices, and nobody's going to get to see them. That's unfair. And it took me a little while to figure that out. And the very first April 1st, my challenge was a song that you don't like, or a band that you don't like. And it, like, so many people left the group because people got into fights. What do you mean, fuck you? This band is fucking great. Blah, blah, blah. So I don't really lean towards that. And every month, when people know it's kind of time to suggest things, like when I'm making the next calendar, they'll be like, how about a song you don't like? And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, I mean, I'm pretty much in my life, I'm pretty much an optimist. And I realize how far dark people can go just by saying, like, name a song you don't like. And it's like, oh, fuck these fucking guys. They did this to, like, it's like, oh my God, don't make it personal. So I do sort of skirt around things that are going to be negative content because it's just going to get in Facebook's, radar anyway. And Facebook is becoming like more than 50% ads now. Like, and I've been concerned about what to do with that group if I could put it somewhere else, but there's nothing else quite like the Facebook platform, you know. And it'll be what it is. But people do really, they like to post. People like to talk about music, and that's there's you post once a day and you scroll around and people have conversations about that. Oh God, I was going to choose that, and there's no real heavy duty rules, but I've learned things here and there. And Lenny is one of my admins, actually. Lenny Splendorio and David Brady are the admins for the group, who are really, really helpful. And people, it's a group to engage about music, and we ask that you keep the conversation that day to the challenge for that day. And other ones are still going to be on scroll because sometimes a challenge 3 days ago is very active. And then I have a Rockers for Life YouTube channel, and I'll put together, not that often, but once every few months, I'll put together a playlist from one challenge that was just really exciting and had a lot of input. So I'll put together a playlist of like 75 songs, like, oh, here's 75 songs that you guys chose that, that have blue in the title or whatever, you know. So I try to spread it around a little bit. I mean, it's important to me to connect through music. I guess that's just who I am,
Yeah.
and it's fun. And I should probably do like a Rockers for Life meetup, and that was where I was headed before COVID, and everything sort of shook itself out and renumbered itself. And the group is certainly around, and still it's a very vital group. There's a lot of conversations on it, and a lot of times I just join in conversations and I don't even post. I don't have to post to be in conversations. And and you make friends there. God, it sounds like a Facebook ad, but anyway. But yeah, I'm committed to that group. Wherever I am in the world, like, I'm like, oh God, it's the first of the month, the calendar's got to go up, like, and I've definitely not been on this continent when that's happened, and I've had to make sure that things get taken care of and stuff. But yeah, it's super fun, and I'm always learning something, and I think that's what it's all about. That's what's important to me.
It's amazing how so many people are committed to the page. One way I know it's midnight is when I get the Facebook notification that Al Quint has
Yes.
posted a video. That's when I know it's midnight. It's like he sets his alarm, I think, and he waits.
It's very funny because there's that group of midnight posters that are like, I never post at midnight. Like, I don't, although I do sometimes time my posts if I have one that I think other people will have too, because I have that ego and I have to be first, like, but in general, yeah, there's a group of people that always post at midnight, and it cracks me up, really. And there's also a group of people that post during their breakfast. Like, you can just sort of see, it's like they're like, oh, I got my coffee and I thought of this, or whatever. But it really, I love that people have worked it into their routines. I mean, I'm at an age where, like, life routine is working and taking care of myself, but my music routine is really important. I've got my days where I will, like, allow myself a couple hours to just fart around on YouTube and just look at stuff. Like, that's part of who I am. I've got to do that, or Bandcamp, or whatever. But I love that game has brought routine into, or has fit into people's, routines. Not that it's routine, because every challenge is different every day.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would recommend anybody who hasn't checked it out to, definitely do so. I'll put the link in the video description, and there'll be a bunch of other links too that everybody should check out in this video description. All great stuff all around.
The one
Um,
thing I have to say, because it's sort of a thing, you have to answer questions to get into the Rockers for Life group. And it's only because it's an anti-spam thing, but they're real questions. As long as you really answer them, it's not a problem. But if you don't answer the questions, you don't get into the group. And it's too busy a group for me to allow a possible bot in, because that would just, So anyway, but yeah, so if you go to join, answer the questions, and you'll get in, and say hello, But it's fun. I'm proud of it. I don't really think about it in like, my day to day, but I do. I like that it's there.
Absolutely. As we head to the home stretch here, I want to get into tattooing with you, because I know that's been a major part of your life as well. Um, do you currently own a tattoo shop?
I don't. I sold it in 2009. I used to own Powerhouse Tattoo. I opened Powerhouse Tattoo in Montclair, New Jersey in 1991. I sold it in 2009. I still work the front desk 2 days a week.
Mhm.
So I'm there on, what days now? I'm there on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I chill out. I don't tattoo. I do organize things and, do what needs to be done in the shop. It's second nature for me to know how to run a tattoo shop, and the tattoo business is a great creative environment, to be in. So I'm proud to still be in there, but I don't own it anymore. But it's been there now for a long time.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what appears to my eyes to be kind of a groundswell in the tattoo industry. I'd say, I started getting tattooed myself in my late teens,
Mhm.
um, which was like, mid to late 90s. And even, in the last, say, I would think 10 to 15 years, I've seen tattooing really kind of blow up. You had Ink Master and all these things where it's a very, very much a mainstream activity.
Mhm.
Um, you started tattooing quite a few years ago. Um, what are your thoughts on where the industry's gone, and where do you perhaps see it going into the future?
Well, I started tattooing in the mid 80s and opened the shop in 91. I mean, after, serving, I apprenticed with Spiderweb in New York City. Um, and It was very different. I was attracted to the business for this sort of rebellious thing that I saw, attracted to tattooing and the business itself, because it was just funny and fucking weird. Like, it was just great to hang around in, and the people who got tattooed always had some kind of really interesting life stuff going on. And tattooing that's what tattoos are to me. Still, they're still like a timeline. Like, I didn't get my Stranglers tattoo until after I interviewed Hugh Cornwell. Like, I have several music oriented tattoos, and some I just got, but they were so sacred to me. I just was kind of like, oh. And after that, I was like, all right, I can do this now, because this is an actual achievement. Um, but they're like little, like, your body is a scrapbook, and I could probably tell you the, not the year, but the order that I got all of my tattoos in, and they mean something. And I've got plenty of tattoos that don't mean anything, because when you work in a tattoo shop, you're just freaking sitting around tattooing each other, like kind of, you know. And like, oh, that's cool. Let me get this. But the industry, I mean, so I remember, I don't have any tattoo equipment that I can show you, but tattoo equipment has been industrialized in that it's nice, it's ergonomic, it's good for your hand. It didn't used to be. Tattoo machines were these really gnarly things with exposed you know, wires and connections and stuff like that. And you wouldn't hurt yourself using them, but they weren't designed. They were put together. They looked like jailhouse pieces. Um, I remember I used to have to help Spider sometimes because his hand would get stuck after a day of tattooing and just kind of help him massage it out. Nowadays, there's tattoo machines that are manufactured that a lot of people learn on that are just like one large pen, and you're not straining your body as much, and that's only designed because the tattoo industry has gotten bigger and there's money in it, so they'll invest in creating something that's ergonomic. Um, Back in the days when we tattooed, there weren't even like tattoo chairs. You either got a barber chair somewhere, which were enormously heavy, or you just had clients either sitting up on a bar stool or laying down on a bed, or you really configured your body in order to do the tattoo for them. There was a lot of occupational hazards there, being a tattooist. And all of that's pretty much gone. There's all types of tattoo furniture now. And that's all great. I think it's great for the health of tattooers. I don't, when everything started getting televised, I felt that clients started coming in thinking they knew more about tattooing. And I used to really love the, I don't know if it was mystique, but I used to love guiding people and really consulting with them and having them say, you know, I want to get, you know, this skull with waves and I want it about this big, and then helping them come to a great design that would really work for them, that would look great on their skin forever and 6 months. That's what I always feel is the responsibility of the tattooer, to make sure that your tattoo is going to look good forever. And I think after the TV program started, that the general public believes that they knew more about tattooing than they did. And there were more demands like, well, I'm the customer, this is what I want, and less listening of a person experienced. So saying, yeah, I know that you want this, and it's going to look crappy in a year if you get it this size. And I think that's part of where maybe our society is going. I like there's commercials on TV for drugs. Like, tell your doctor you want to go on this drug. Like all this sort of self-diagnosis, and this is what I want. And I get that you're the cause of the matter in your own life, like everybody is. And there's some times where I think you have to listen to the voice of mastery or the voice of reason or the voice of like somebody that's been doing something for a long time. And I don't really know anything about the medical profession, but like commercials like that just irk the fuck out of me. Like, it's just like, tell your doctor you want to go on this drug. You know, maybe doctors need, I don't know. I can't even speak to that. But so tattooing is there's a much larger audience. It's definitely more mainstream. I work the front desk, and I do find that people don't always listen. I do try to be friendly and tell them, and I think if I get to talk to them for a little bit and get into a conversation with people, they'll start to understand. And a lot of people come in and they just go, this is what I want, and how much is it, and when can you do it? And there's still so many questions to ask. I mean, it's a warm art, you know. I need to know if you're on blood thinners. You know, there's just like there's a million things, and that's why I love tattooing so much, because it's part art, it's part biology, it's part psychology, and it's part, you know, medicine. Like you have to really treat people. A lot of people, there's one thing now that I do really object to, which is people are using numbing cream like crazy, and people are overdosing on lidocaine now, because they're just using numbing cream. And, you know, I've never liked the feeling of a tattoo, but I think that in some ways it's what you go through to get something that you want.
Right.
Um, and I'm very disappointed when I see that people are getting anesthesia, like full body anesthesia to get big pieces. It's like, whoa, come on, like freaking man up. I One of my favorite football players, actually, and I'm not gonna, but he said, "Oh yeah, no, I get the anesthesia. I don't even sit." And I'm like, "Oh my god!" But he's a maniac. But he like said, like, I was so surprised and so let down. Like, oh my, really? Um, but so there's a lot of aspects about tattooing that have shifted, and I really just want to see the people that are talented and care about the business thrive. And there's a like there's sort of a newer model of the tattoo shop that has 20 artists and they're all part-time that um I wouldn't say that I object to, but it sort of rubs me the wrong way because I'm a tattooer. You know, I tattooed full time and that's what I did. And that's just who I was and what I did. And I feel like there's less commitment if it's part time. Um, and I'm not really hitting it on the head in terms of what I mean, but it's a lifestyle. And I don't always see, so it had been a lifestyle. And what I'm seeing now is that people are in it because they can learn how to do it. And it may not be a lifestyle. And that's where I feel like it loses its vitality
Hmm.
somewhere. Um, and I mean, I love the business and I still go to conventions and I just wrote a chapter in a book called In the Shadows. It's a book on the history of New York City tattooing, and I wrote a chapter about Spider in the book. The book came out last year. It's a big book. Um, but yeah, so there's definitely shifting happening.
Well, I think I know what you mean, where as you know, I spent years reporting on the automotive industry.
Yes.
And it's kind of like the difference between that cool mom and pop shop you went to, that your dad got his work done at, you know, your very first car was put together there, versus like the consolidated huge mega auto emporium where there's like 20 bays and
Yes.
guys have uniforms, you don't know who they are, you don't know where they came from, and it's very in, out, in, out. I think
Well,
that
and
might be
cars
kind of.
themselves, just the technology of cars. Like when I was in high school, we had auto shop. I used to change my own oil,
Mhm.
and I change my own air filters. I didn't get that crazy into it, but I could work on certain parts of my own car. And now you really can't. I mean, there's a couple things you can do, but depending on the year of your car, a lot of things are just closed up in your engine compartment, you know. So there's
Yeah, I mean, I think I know exactly what you're kind of aiming at with your thought, because it's the same thing in a lot of ways with record stores. Look, you and I both get inundated with Bandcamp links and Facebook pages, and here's a zip file download of my new record, and that's cool. But for an example, there's a relatively new record store in Beverly, Mass, Bridge 9 Records, the label, started as a brick and mortar place. And they're hosting like everything from art shows to like vegan markets to all kinds of things there. And
oh,
it's a hub, you know. And Chris Wren, who owns the place, he's been in the scene a super long time. I was there yesterday for an art show, and it was, guys from AF were there, Slapshot, Kill Slug, AC, you know what I mean? So all these guys are still kind of coming out. Um, but you don't get that if you're going to um, kind of like a chain place, or something that's not built from the ground up.
right. Yeah.
There's culture and then there's commerce. The two can coexist, but it has to be culture driven first, and then the commerce will come. I think a lot of major operations are commerce first, and they're kind of selling culture that's more universal to get more people through the door,
Yeah.
if you know where I'm
Yeah.
going with that.
Yeah. Very well put. Yeah.
Yeah. But if I had the time and the money, I'd still be a walking ink blotter. I would fill myself up, but it's been a couple years since I've had new work done. I've got to remedy that sometime and get some more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, tattoos are still great. They're a great form of self-expression. And I mean, certain things that the industry that like within the industry that's been taken on are better for the artists, you know. And there's so much. I mean, when I sold Powerhouse, we had a computer. We did have a computer at the shop, but it wasn't even smartphone time. I think it was flip phone time. But so people didn't really have that like instant access. And you didn't really carry around a tablet, and now there's a lot of apps for drawing and that kind of thing, and it makes it easier. Like it does make it easier, and sometimes you want to draw something that's unique, and a person wants your actual art, and sometimes they want something that's fairly standard and you can reproduce whatever 2/3 of it in an instant and then just change around part of it. And that those are all good tools. You know, I certainly don't want to deny the existence of technology and say, oh, it was better and all that, because I'm sure that Spider was not happy having to have his hands, you know, massaged. And a lot of older tattooers had arthritis and stuff like that. And, you know, and there's definitely from just leaning over and hunching over for years, there's there are injuries that happen, you know, for sure. So I like the idea of it being easier for the tattooer, and I I like what you said about the commerce now leading the culture as opposed to the other way around. I think that that's pretty valid.
Yeah, yeah. I tend to find things, whether it be record stores or anything, where it's more culturally driven, especially these days. It might be a bit harder to sift through to find those things, but they're
Yeah.
still around. They're
Oh,
still around. Rockers for Life is an example of that. Not that there's commerce in it, but it's something that's culturally driven.
yes.
And that goes back to FMU. There's that. People do things for the love of it. It's not always necessarily, like I self-publish books, like you mentioned earlier. I haven't paid a single month's rent in all the years I've been doing that through that. You know what I mean? It's not about that.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, would I turn it down? Well, it depends. I'd consider anything, but I'm not going to be rich. I'm 30 plus years into doing what I do. It's never supported me. I've always had to do other stuff. Um, but in a way, it's better to listen to something like FMU because you all do it because you love it.
Right.
No one's dragging themselves to the drudgery of WFMU. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
done,
So it's
and
a
that's
fan.
why the output's always been such high quality and has such meaning to people because it comes from a meaningful place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's wonderful you're still active in it. I thank you personally for all the opportunities you've given me over the years through FMU. You and Pat were always so welcoming. Um, some of the best times of my life were spent in that studio, whether it's the house or the one in Jersey City.
Mhm.
So I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Um, I'm so happy you joined me for this conversation today, Diane. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking me, Joel. This is really cool. And it's great to catch up with you. And I love what you're doing. And again, the world needs people like you who are doing it because they want to. And they hear that somebody has something to say or somebody's got a story and they tell the story. And I would love for you to be a millionaire. And I love that you're going like you're moving full speed ahead regardless, because that's important. We don't all, just get to make a ton of money off of it, and that's not the most important thing, right? It's a connection. I've known you for decades. So crazy.
Yeah, well, I was always so happy to be on your show. So I'm just so happy to be able to return the favor, have you on mine. And as I said to the viewer in the video description, there'll be all kinds of links to check out what Diane's up to. I'd encourage you all to do so. And I hope we get to do this again sometime soon.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane.